The lake didn't give them back the way it took them. When the water receded, the dead were still smiling, and every one of them was whispering a name.
Welcome to Horror Audiobook.
This is not a story about drowning. This is a story about return. When a historic drought drains a forgotten lake, it exposes the ruins of a submerged village, along with bodies that should have turned to bone decades ago. But they haven't decayed, they haven't dissolved, they haven't left. Instead, they rise waterlogged, smiling and whispering the names of the living. And once the lake speaks your name, it never stops. Chapter 1. The lake was never empty, it was waiting. The drought began quietly. It did not arrive with cracked earth and headlines. It crept in through ordinary days, through mild summers, through thinning rain, through a reservoir that dipped by inches no one bothered to measure. The lake outside Briar County had always seemed permanent. It was wide, reflective, indifferent. It swallowed the horizon and gave nothing back. Until it did. By late August, the shoreline had receded so far that the old boat dock rested uselessly on dry, splintered mud. The waterline, once pressed against reeds and cattails, had drawn back like a breath being held too long. What remained was not simply less lake. What remained was exposure. The first thing anyone noticed was the tip of a structure piercing the surface, a sharp angle of dark wood cutting up through shallow water like a broken bone. People thought it was debris at first, a log, a remnant of a dock. Then the shape sharpened. It was a steeple. Word spread fast. Briar Hollow, the village drowned 40 years ago when the dam collapsed, had begun to rise. By the second week, the lake had retreated enough to reveal more than just the steeple. The peaked roof of a church emerged next, shingles warped but intact. Then a row of iron cemetery gates, their curved bars etched with rust but still standing in perfect alignment. Beyond them, the vague outlines of collapsed homes appeared, their roofs sagging inward like rib cages. The town of Briar County treated it like an attraction. Local news crews arrived first, broadcasting live from the muddy banks. They spoke in somber voices about history resurfacing, about tragedy rediscovered. Old photographs were shown side by side with the emerging ruins, quaint wooden houses, children playing in the street, church picnics under banners that read Briar Hollow Harvest Social, 1979. 47 people had drowned when the dam failed. 47 names carved into a granite memorial that now stood at the entrance to the lake park. Tourists began to trickle in by the weekend. They parked in uneven rows along the road. They walked across the drying lake bed in sandals and sneakers, careful not to sink into the thick gray mud. Some laughed. Some posed for pictures in front of the skeletal remains of porches and staircases. They called it hauntingly beautiful. They called it eerie. They did not call it wrong. The phrase returned with the water's retreat. An old superstition, one the surviving elders of Briar County had whispered decades ago, began circulating again, passed between camera operators and elderly onlookers like a relic pulled from the attic. The lake keeps what it loves. No one could say who had first spoken it. Some said it was Mrs. Alder, who lost her husband in the flood and refused to leave the shoreline for 3 days. Others insisted it came from a boy who survived by clinging to a fence post as water swallowed the town. But the phrase stuck. The lake keeps what it loves. It had been dismissed as grief-driven nonsense, a poetic attempt to make sense of disaster. But now, as the ruins lay bare beneath an empty sky, the words felt heavier. The lake keeps what it loves. Sheriff Daniel Harlow stood at the edge of the newly exposed shore and removed his sunglasses. He had been a rookie deputy when the dam failed. He remembered helicopters, screaming, the metallic smell of ruptured earth. He did not remember silence. The silence unsettled him now. There should have been birds. There should have been insects buzzing over the mud. There should have been raccoon tracks, deer prints, some sign that nature had rushed in to claim the exposed ground. There were none. The lake bed stretched outward in pale gray stillness, smooth as poured cement. Untouched. Harlow crouched and pressed his palm into the soil. It was soft enough to yield under pressure, but firm enough to hold a shape. If anything had crossed it, anything at all, there would be marks. There were none. Behind him, a group of teenagers laughed as they filmed themselves walking toward the church. One of them shouted that it felt like stepping onto the moon. Harlow stood slowly. The air smelled wrong. It should have smelled like rot, like stagnant water and long-submerged wood. Instead, it carried a faint mineral sharpness, clean, almost sterile, as if the lake had preserved something. By evening, the water had retreated another foot. The church doors were now visible. They remained closed. Reporters debated whether to attempt entry the next morning. Historians speculated about artifacts still intact inside. A few locals advised caution, but their voices were drowned by curiosity. Hours passed, though outside, the sky remained an unmoving blue. As dusk approached, the lakebed seemed to darken, though no clouds had formed. The exposed structures cast long, thin shadows across the mud. A tourist named Elena Morales wandered slightly farther than the others, drawn toward the cemetery gates. She was careful with each step, watching for soft patches in the ground. Her camera hung from her neck, snapping photos in rhythmic bursts. When she reached the gates, she paused. The iron bars were decorated with lilies. They were not rusted through. They were intact. She lifted her camera and zoomed past them. Rows of gravestones tilted unevenly inside the fence. Some had sunk slightly into the earth, others leaned at odd angles, but they were not broken. The names were legible. 47 graves. 47 markers. Elena lowered the camera. The memorial at the park entrance listed 47 dead. But Briar Hollow Cemetery had existed before the flood. There should have been more. A breeze moved across the lakebed, slow, deliberate. Elena felt it brush her ankles. She looked down instinctively. The mud around her feet was smooth. Unmarked. She turned in a slow circle. The teenagers were still near the church. The sheriff stood by his cruiser. A news van idled with its lights on. Everything appeared normal. Except there were no footprints behind her. She had walked at least 30 yards from the main group. The mud should have carried her trail. It did not. Her breath shortened. She lifted her foot experimentally and pressed it back down harder this time. The mud gave way, forming a shallow impression. She stepped back. The print filled itself. Not quickly, not dramatically, but subtly, as if moisture seeped upward from below, smoothing the surface until her mark vanished. Elena's throat tightened. She whispered to herself that it was physics, water redistribution, saturation levels. But beneath her shoes, the ground felt less like soil and more like skin. Behind her, from the direction of the church, a distant metallic creak echoed. The sound of something shifting weight. Elena looked toward the steeple. It stood rigid against the fading light. Nothing moved. The lake keeps what it loves. The phrase pressed into her thoughts uninvited. Across the shore, Sheriff Harlow was staring at the lakebed again. Not at the ruins. Not at the people. At the center. There, near where the water still pooled in a shrinking oval, the surface rippled once. Not from wind. Not from a thrown stone. From beneath. It was subtle, a tightening, a small tremor. Like something turning over in its sleep. Harlow felt a memory he could not place, a pressure in his ears, a sensation of being observed. He took a step closer to the waterline. The ripple faded. The surface went still. Behind him, laughter resumed. Someone shouted that they were heading home before dark. The sky bled into orange and then into violet. The ruins of Briar Hollow stood exposed, fragile and patient. As night settled over the empty lake, the mud hardened just enough to hold shape. And somewhere beneath the thinning water, something exhaled. The lake was not empty. It had never been empty. It had been waiting. Chapter 2. They came for photos. They found names instead. By morning, the lake was trending. Drone footage of the exposed church steeple had already accumulated 500,000 views overnight. News anchors called it a once-in-a-generation spectacle. Influencers labeled it Sunken City Revealed. Urban explorers drove in from 3 counties away, drawn by the promise of something abandoned and photogenic. They came for atmosphere. They came for history. They came for angles and lighting, and the soft drama of ruins against a dry horizon. They did not come for names. By noon, the shoreline resembled a festival without music. Tripods dotted the cracked mud. Camera shutters snapped in relentless rhythm. Someone had set up a portable ring light near the cemetery gates, its white glow artificial against the gray earth. The church doors, now fully exposed, stood several inches above hardened mud. The wood was swollen but intact. Its once-white paint had peeled into curling flakes that resembled shed skin. A group of urban explorers approached it with reverent excitement. Among them was Daniel Dane Mercer, a content creator known for exploring abandoned hospitals and derelict amusement parks. He wore a chest-mounted camera and narrated everything in a low, dramatic whisper. "All right, guys," he said to his live audience of nearly 40,000 viewers. "We're about to enter Briar Hollow's church, submerged for 4 decades. Nobody's been inside since the flood." He paused for effect. "Let's see what survived." Behind him, Alina Morales adjusted her own camera lens. She hadn't slept much after the previous evening. The image of the self-smoothing mud lingered in her thoughts like a trick of light she couldn't fully dismiss. But daylight made everything feel manageable. Explainable. The sheriff had roped off certain areas, but enforcement was loose. Curiosity moved faster than caution. The church doors groaned as Dane pushed them open. A breath of air slipped out. Not stale. Not rotten. Cold. It carried the faint scent of mineral water and something metallic, like pennies pressed against the tongue. Inside, pews stood in neat rows, coated in a thin gray film. Hymnals remained stacked in holders. The stained glass windows were cracked but largely intact, colored fragments scattering muted sunlight across the warped wooden floor. 40 years underwater. And yet nothing had collapsed. Dane stepped forward carefully, boots pressing into the damp boards. His camera adjusted automatically to the dim interior. His live chat flooded with comments. "How is it still standing? Check the altar. Bro, this is insane." Then the audio shifted. It was subtle at first, a distortion beneath his voice. A faint static, as if wind were brushing the microphone. Dane paused. "Do you guys hear that?" he asked. The chat erupted. "Yeah. Sounds like whispering. Probably interference." Dane laughed lightly. "It's probably interference." He took another step. The distortion grew clearer. Not static. Not wind. Something layered beneath the sound of his breathing. A murmur. Faint. Wet. He turned slowly toward the left aisle. The hallway between pews ended at a narrow staircase descending into darkness, a basement level, once fully submerged. "The crypt. Basement access," Dane whispered, excitement flickering in his tone. "Should we?" The chat scrolled rapidly. "Yes. Don't. Do it. Alina felt the air change. She stood near the doorway, unwilling to descend but unable to leave. The interior of the church felt insulated from the outside world, like stepping into a sealed container. No insects, no distant traffic, only the faint echo of breathing and the soft groan of wood adjusting to dryness. Dane moved toward the staircase. Each step creaked but held. The camera adjusted again as darkness thickened. Halfway down, he froze. The audio distortion sharpened. It was no longer a murmur. It was a pattern. "If you hear it once, it's the wind," someone in the chat typed. Dane swallowed. "If you hear it twice," another comment followed, "it's the lake." He laughed again, but the sound wavered. At the base of the stairs, the crypt stretched in low-ceilinged shadow. Stone walls glistened faintly with moisture. Metal coffin plaques reflected his flashlight beam. The air felt heavier here. "Close." Dane swept the light across the room. Nothing moved. He exhaled slowly. "See, just creepy acoustics." Then, the whisper sharpened. Not a crowd. Not random noise. A single voice. It did not echo. It did not reverberate. It sounded as if it were standing directly beside him. "Dane." He inhaled sharply. The flashlight beam jerked sideways, illuminating only stone. "Did you guys?" The chat exploded. "It said your name." "Replay it." "I heard it." Dane's breath quickened. No, that was feedback. He forced a grin, though his jaw tightened visibly. "Just the acoustics." Behind him, Alina felt something brush her shoulder. She turned instinctively. No one stood there. But the church doors were slowly swinging inward, closing with gentle insistence. She stepped toward them. The whisper came again. Not from below. From behind her. Alina. Her name was not common here. No one in this town knew her. Her heart slammed once, hard enough to hurt. She told herself it was suggestion, that hearing Dane's name had primed her imagination. "If you hear it once, it's the wind," she murmured under her breath. She stepped forward. Her shoes scraped the floor. The whisper came again. Closer. Alina. Not breathy. Not distant. Right against her ear. She dropped her camera. It clattered loudly against the wooden floor, the sound ricocheting through the nave. Dane rushed up the stairs, eyes wide. What happened? She could not answer immediately. Instead, she bent down with trembling hands and picked up her camera. "I thought," she began. "Thought what?" She hesitated. "I thought I heard something." Dane nodded too quickly. "Yeah, same, but it's acoustics." He was convincing himself. They both knew it. Alina powered on her camera and scrolled to the last recorded clip. She pressed play. For a moment, only ambient noise filled the speakers, distant creaks, soft movement. Then, Alina. The voice was unmistakable. Faint. Wet. Close. Not distorted. Not ambiguous. Her name. Dane stared at her, color draining from his face. The chat on his live stream was spiraling. "Leave. It's saying names. Get out now." The church door slammed shut. The sound was sudden, violent, a crack of wood against wood that echoed like a gunshot. Both of them flinched. Silence followed. Thick. Pressing. The air inside the church felt colder now, as if the lake had drawn breath through the walls. Alina stepped backward toward the door. Her hand hovered inches from the handle. She paused, because beneath the silence, there were more voices. Layered. Soft. Not shouting, whispering. Names, different names, spoken one at a time. Slowly, carefully, as if reading from a list. Dane backed toward the exit beside her. The handle turned easily when she pulled. The door opened without resistance. Sunlight spilled in. Warm, ordinary. The whispers stopped instantly. Outside, tourists continued taking photos. Laughter floated through the air. The lakebed stretched in pale stillness. Nothing appeared different. Except, across the exposed mud, leading from the waterline toward the church doors, was a single set of footprints. Deep, water-filled, fresh. They ended at the threshold, behind Alina and Dane. And there were no matching prints leading away. The lake keeps what it loves. Alina looked down at her playback screen one last time. The timestamp on the whisper clip flickered. For a brief second, it showed tomorrow's date, then corrected itself. The breeze moved gently across the exposed ruins. And somewhere beneath the thinning water, another name was spoken. Chapter 3. The first body returned smiling. The body surfaced at dawn. No one saw it rise. No splash announced it, no dramatic swell of water. It was simply there, half submerged in the thick gray mud near the abandoned dock, as if it had been placed carefully during the night. The first person to notice was a fisherman named Carl Whitaker, though there were no fish left in the shrinking lake. Carl came every morning out of habit. He carried his folding chair and thermos, even now, even when the waterline had retreated so far that casting a line felt symbolic at best. The lake had been part of his routine for 30 years. It felt wrong not to sit beside it. He saw the shape before he understood it. At first he thought it was driftwood, a log caught in the mud, something pale and swollen. Then the log blinked. Carl froze. The early light spread thin and gold across the lakebed, outlining the figure in soft illumination. It lay on its back, one arm partially submerged, the other bent awkwardly beneath its torso. The skin was gray, bloated, intact. Carl stood slowly, thermos slipping from his hand, and spilling coffee into the dirt. The face was turned slightly toward him. The eyes were open. And the lips were curled upward in a faint, unmistakable smile. For a moment, Carl's mind refused to interpret what he was seeing. It offered alternatives. It suggested tricks of light. It insisted on illusion. But the body did not dissolve into reason. It remained. He took one step closer. Then another. The mud did not swallow his boots. It did not shift beneath him. It held him steady as he approached the corpse. The man appeared to be in his late 30s. His hair floated slightly in the thin layer of remaining water beneath his head, drifting as if stirred by a current that did not exist. There were no visible wounds, no exposed bone, no missing flesh. The skin was swollen from prolonged immersion, yes, but not decomposed, not skeletal, not ruined by fish or rot. It looked preserved. Carl swallowed hard and leaned closer. The eyes tracked him, not dramatically, not in a cinematic snap, but subtly. The pupils shifted a fraction of an inch. Following, Carl stumbled backward and fell into the mud, breath punching from his lungs. The body did not move again. It simply lay there, smiling. By the time the sheriff arrived, a small crowd had formed at a cautious distance. Word traveled quickly in Briar County, especially now. Sheriff Harlow stepped out of his cruiser with the careful restraint of a man who had seen tragedy before. He recognized the face instantly. Thomas Grady, one of the 47, declared dead in the original flood. Buried symbolically, when no remains were recovered. Harlow approached slowly, his boots making shallow impressions in the lakebed that did not fully hold their shape. The body lay exactly as Carl described. Gray, swollen, smiling. "Jesus," one of the deputies whispered. Harlow crouched beside the corpse. The smell was faint. There should have been rot, decay, the unmistakable stench of death long past its time. Instead, there was only the scent of clean mineral water and something metallic. Like pennies. Harlow extended a gloved hand and gently pressed 2 fingers against the man's neck. Cold. Solid. Not soft. Not deteriorated. "Bag him," Harlow said quietly. As the medical team lifted the body onto a stretcher, the head rolled slightly to one side. The smile widened. Just a fraction. Or perhaps it had always been that way. No one could be certain. Hours passed, though outside, the sky remained a sterile blue. At the county morgue, Dr. Elaine Mercer examined the body under harsh fluorescent lighting. She had performed autopsies for 22 years. She understood the mechanics of death. She did not understand this. She dictated her findings in a controlled, clinical tone. Subject exhibits advanced water exposure swelling, skin integrity intact, no visible signs of aquatic scavenging, no significant decomposition consistent with time elapsed. She paused. Her gloved fingers traced the man's forearm. The skin was cool but resilient. When pressed, it did not rupture. It rebounded, as if recently submerged. She examined the lungs. Filled, completely saturated with water. She leaned back slowly. "This is impossible," she whispered. A deputy standing nearby shifted uneasily. How long was he under? 40 years. The deputy let out a nervous breath that almost resembled laughter. Dr. Mercer removed her gloves and stared at the body. "Time did not touch this body," she said. The words fell heavy in the sterile room. She repeated it, quieter this time. "Time did not touch him." As the autopsy concluded, she prepared to release the remains for temporary holding. The gurney wheels squeaked faintly as it was rolled toward the ambulance bay. Outside, reporters had already gathered. The story was spreading. 47 people drowned. 1 returned. And he was smiling. As the stretcher crossed the threshold of the morgue and entered the ambulance loading area, the air shifted. Not colder. Heavier. 3 paramedics moved to lift the body into the back of the vehicle. The doors stood open. Sunlight streamed in. And then, the whisper came. It was not faint this time. It was not ambiguous. It rose like condensation from warm pavement. 3 names. Spoken at once. Layered. Distinct. Elena. Dane. Carl. The paramedics froze. The deputy dropped the clipboard in his hand. Carl Whitaker, who had followed the ambulance at a distance, went pale. Dr. Mercer felt her stomach drop. The body's mouth did not move. The lips remained curved upward. But the sound came from the space around it. From the air itself. Elena. Dane. Carl. All 3 stood within earshot. All 3 heard it clearly. And each of them felt something tighten behind their ribs. A pull. Subtle. Persistent. The lake keeps what it loves. The ambulance doors slammed shut with mechanical finality. The whisper ceased. Birds, absent for days, suddenly burst from a nearby tree line in frantic motion. The air returned to ordinary. The crowd erupted into frightened murmurs. Carl staggered backward. Dane, who had come to capture footage of the first body, lowered his camera with shaking hands. Elena's phone buzzed in her pocket. She hesitated before answering. A notification. A tagged post. Someone had replayed her church footage. The timestamp glitch had returned. Only now, the date was not tomorrow. It was today. And the timestamp read 6:12 a.m. The exact time Carl had discovered the body. She looked up slowly toward the lake. The waterline had receded another few inches since morning, exposing more mud, more ruins, more waiting earth. Near the center of the shrinking lake, a single bubble rose to the surface and popped. Then another. Then three in quick succession. As if something below had shifted position. As if something had heard its own voice carried back. Sheriff Harlow stepped away from the ambulance and stared across the lake bed. He had lived here his entire life. He had believed the flood was tragedy. An accident. A cruel convergence of rain and engineering failure. But accidents do not preserve bodies. Accidents do not speak names. Behind him, the granite memorial listing the 47 dead stood silent at the park entrance. He glanced toward it instinctively. The engraved names caught the light. 47. He counted them once, then twice. His breath slowed. There were 46. One name had vanished. Thomas Grady. The lake keeps what it loves. And it had just given one back. Which meant there were 46 left. Beneath the surface. Waiting. Chapter 4. The church bells rang underwater. By the third day, Briar Hollow no longer felt like an attraction. It felt like a wound that had been reopened too quickly. Yellow police tape fluttered loosely around the church perimeter. Sheriff Harlow had finally restricted access after the body surfaced, and the whispers spread through town like mold in damp wood. The tourists still came, but their laughter was quieter now, their footsteps slower, cameras pointed not in excitement, but in anticipation. They were waiting for something else to rise. Inside the church, the air had grown colder. Dr. Mercer insisted on a second examination of the building structure. Harlow approved it reluctantly. 2 deputies accompanied her, along with a state investigator named Grant Hollies, a man who did not believe in superstition. He believed in pressure systems, structural tension, logical explanations. At least he had. The church doors groaned open once more, revealing the same preserved interior, pews aligned, altar upright, dust unmoved. But something had changed. The bell rope. It hung from the ceiling near the front of the nave, descending from the steeple tower above. The thick braided cord, once white, was now stained a pale gray. It should have been stiff from years underwater. Instead, it swayed. Not dramatically, not violently, but gently. Left, right, left. There was no wind. Holly stepped forward, eyes narrowed. Air pressure shift, he muttered, structural settling. He moved closer. The rope continued to swing. Left, right, left. Dr. Mercer stood still, watching it. Who rang at last? She asked. Harlow didn't answer immediately. The flood had happened during a Sunday service. 47 people inside. The bell had been ringing when the dam failed. The rope swung once more. And stopped. Hollies reached out and grabbed it firmly, stilling its motion. Silence pressed in around them. The kind of silence that made ears ring. There, Holly said, no mystery. He released it. The rope remained still. For 3 seconds. 4. Then, it snapped upward. Violently. As if pulled from above. The bell tolled. The sound was deep. Resonant. Wrong. It did not echo like a bell rung in open air. It reverberated like something struck underwater. Muffled, heavy, distant, and yet impossibly close. All four of them flinched. Dust shook loose from the rafters in a thin gray cascade. Hollis grabbed the rope again, this time holding it tight with both hands. "It's mechanical," he said sharply, though his voice lacked conviction. The bell tolled again. But the rope did not move. It remained taut in his grip. And still, the bell rang. Dr. Mercer's pulse thundered in her ears. Harlow stared upward toward the dark hollow of the steeple. There was no visible movement. No shifting silhouette. Only shadow. The third toll came softer. And then silence returned. The rope slackened. Hollis released it slowly. No one spoke for several long seconds. Finally, Harlow cleared his throat. "We're done here." They exited the church without further inspection. Outside, the lake bed stretched in pale stillness. The waterline had retreated again, exposing more of the village street beyond the cemetery. The faint outlines of shopfronts now stood visible, signs warped but legible beneath layers of dried silt. The exposure felt deliberate, measured, as if the lake were revealing Briar Hollow piece by piece. That night the bells rang again. No one saw the rope move, because no one was inside the church. The sound carried across Briar County just after midnight. Deep, slow, one toll, then another. Residents woke in their beds, confused at first. The lake was nearly empty. Sound didn't travel like that across dry ground. But they heard it clearly. A distant bell, echoing across fields and asphalt in sleeping houses. Elena sat upright in her apartment, heart racing. Her windows were closed. Her phone lay dark beside her. The bell rang again. She counted. 3 tolls. A pause. Then 3 more. She swung her legs over the bed and moved toward the window. Outside, the night was still. No wind. No storm. The sky was clear and starless. And yet the sound persisted. Dane, 3 streets away, was already live streaming. "I don't know if you guys can hear this," he whispered into his microphone, "but it's happening again." The audio on his stream captured it perfectly. The bell did not sound metallic. It sounded submerged, as though it were ringing from beneath the earth. Sheriff Harlow stood on his porch listening. His wife clutched his arm. "That's impossible," she whispered. He did not respond, because he knew something the others did not. When the flood happened 40 years ago, survivors claimed they heard the bell continue, ringing long after the water swallowed the steeple. They said it rang underwater. They said it did not stop. Most dismissed it as shock, trauma, the mind trying to impose order on chaos. But now, it was ringing again. Hours passed, though outside, the night stayed the same. The tolling continued at irregular intervals. 3 rings. Pause. 3 rings. Always in sets of 3. And with each echo, something else happened. People began hearing their names woven between the tolls. Soft. Layered. Barely perceptible. Elena pressed her ear against the window pane. Between the 3rd and 4th bell. "Elena." She stepped back, breath catching. Across town. Dane. In a small farmhouse near the outskirts. "Carl. The lake keeps what it loves." The phrase threaded through memory like a warning that had come too late. Some drownings don't end. They relocate. At 2:17 a.m. the final toll sounded. Longer than the others. Lower. It vibrated through foundations and window glass and bone. Then silence fell so abruptly it felt artificial. Like a sound had been cut mid-breath. Morning came without birds. The lake bed appeared unchanged at first glance. But when Harlow returned to the church with deputies at sunrise, he noticed something different. The mud between the water line and the church steps bore impressions. Not footprints. Not quite. They were deeper. Wider. As if something had been dragged slowly from the lake toward the entrance. 3 parallel grooves. They ended at the church doors. And the bell rope hung perfectly still. Except it was wet. Fresh droplets clung to the fibers, sliding slowly downward, pooling on the floorboards beneath. Drip. 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 Harlow stepped inside. The church felt colder than it had the day before. The air smelled stronger, now of mineral and metal. He approached the rope cautiously. Reaching out, he pressed his fingers against it. It was soaked, as if it had been submerged moments ago. Above him, in the steeple tower, something shifted. A faint scraping. Then, a single quiet chime. Not a full toll. Just enough to remind him it was there. Watching. Waiting. Outside, the waterline trembled faintly. A ripple moved across the shrinking surface. Not wind-driven. Not natural. Measured. Intentional. As if something beneath had repositioned itself. Some drownings don't end. They relocate. And the church was no longer just exposed. It was active. That evening, 3 more names were whispered across Briar County. And none of them belonged to the dead. Chapter 5. The dead don't rot, they wait. The second body surfaced before anyone had time to doubt the first. This one rose farther from shore, near what had once been Briar Hollow's main street. A collapsed storefront had become visible 2 days earlier, its wooden sign hanging by one chain. Now, 20 feet beyond it, something pale pressed up through the mud like a memory forcing itself back into consciousness. A teenager spotted it first while flying a drone. He thought it was a mannequin. The camera hovered closer. The face filled the frame. Eyes open. Lips curved upward. Smiling. By the time Sheriff Harlow arrived, the drone footage had already spread online. People weren't shocked anymore. They were waiting. The body belonged to Margaret Klein, age 61 at the time of the flood, seamstress, choir member, declared drowned, never recovered. And yet, there she lay. Skin bloated but unbroken, hair drifting lightly in shallow water, clothing intact beneath a thin film of silt. No fish damage. No bone exposure. No collapse of tissue. The dead don't rot. They wait. That phrase had not existed before. Now it passed quietly between residents like something too heavy to say loudly. By the end of the week, 4 more bodies had surfaced. Each one intact. Each one smiling. Each one tied to the original 47. And each one returned not at random, but in intervals. 3 days. Then 2. Then 1. The timing tightened, as if something beneath the waterline was accelerating. Inside the morgue, Dr. Mercer no longer bothered disguising her fear behind clinical detachment. She worked in silence now, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above her. The third body's lungs told her something impossible. She extracted a sample of the fluid still filling the bronchi and alveoli, clear, mineral-heavy water that had not dissipated in 4 decades. She sent it for analysis. When the results came back, she read them 3 times. The chemical composition matched the current lake water. Not archived samples from 40 years ago. Not what it would have been when the dam burst. It matched today's water. Today's mineral content. Today's chemical balance. She leaned back in her chair slowly. The implication settled like cold weight in her stomach. These lungs, she murmured to herself, were filled recently. But that was impossible. The bodies had not been disturbed. There were no drag marks from deeper sections of the lake, no evidence of someone staging this, no tampering. And yet the water inside them was new. Fresh, as if they had drowned again. Outside, Briar County had begun changing. The air carried a constant faint dampness, though no rain had fallen. Windows fogged from the inside. Sinks developed condensation that tasted faintly metallic. At night, residents dreamed of water. Not violent drowning. Not panic. Just standing waist-deep in the lake, unable to feel the bottom beneath their feet. Listening. The whispers had grown clearer. No longer single names. Now they came in pairs. Sometimes in triplets. Always familiar. Always local. Elena tried to ignore it. She stopped reviewing her footage. She stopped checking the timestamp glitches. She told herself she had been caught in collective hysteria. Until she heard it again. She was alone in her apartment kitchen when it happened. The faucet was off. The sink was dry. She stood staring at her reflection in the window above the counter when Elena. She did not flinch this time. She waited. "If you hear it once, it's the wind," she whispered. Silence followed. Her heart slowed slightly. Then, Elena. Closer. Not from the window. From beneath the sink. Her heart began racing again. She stepped backward. The cabinet doors below the basin rattled faintly. Not violently. Just a tremor. As if something inside had shifted position. She forced herself to move forward instead of away. She crouched slowly and opened the cabinet. Darkness. Pipes. A faint drip of condensation. Nothing else. She exhaled shakily. Her heart slowed. But in the silence, from inside the pipe, Elena. Not echoing. Not distorted. Spoken clearly. She slammed the cabinet door shut and stumbled backward. Across town, Carl Whitaker sat in his recliner with a blanket over his legs. The television murmured softly, but he wasn't watching. He was listening. Because the air around him felt heavier than it had yesterday. And he knew why. His name had been spoken when the first body was loaded into the ambulance. He had heard it clearly. Carl. Now every quiet moment seemed loaded with expectation. He stood slowly and walked toward the hallway bathroom. The light flickered as he turned it on. He leaned over the sink and stared at himself in the mirror. His eyes looked older than he remembered. More sunken. The skin beneath them darker. He leaned closer. For a second. Just a second. He thought he saw water pooling at the base of his reflection's neck. He blinked. It was gone. Behind him, the toilet tank lid trembled faintly. He turned slowly. The lid rattled again. He took one step toward it. The water inside the bowl rippled. Not from vibration. From beneath. He stared. The ripple formed a circle. Then another. Then, his name bubbled up from the water in a wet, layered whisper. Carl. He stumbled backward, striking the doorframe. The ripple vanished. The surface stilled. But his heart did not. Back at the morgue, Dr. Mercer compiled the names of every person who had heard a whisper. She cross-referenced them with the returned bodies. A pattern emerged. Each corpse had spoken exactly one name before the next body surfaced. Each name belonged to someone alive. And within 24 hours of being whispered. That person reported water where there should be none. In pipes, in walls, in air. The dead don't rot. They wait. And when they rise, they call. Sheriff Harlow stood at the granite memorial again that evening. He counted the names. 45 now. 2 more had vanished. Margaret Klein and Daniel Reeves. The memorial was not chipped, not altered. The engraved letters were simply gone, as if erased from memory. Harlow ran his hand across the smooth stone. The surface was cool, dry, but beneath his fingertips he felt something faint. A vibration, like distant ringing. He turned toward the lake. The waterline trembled again. A single figure stood near the edge. For a moment he thought it was a tourist. Then he recognized the posture, the tilt of the head. Thomas Grady, the first, returned, standing ankle-deep in shallow water. Smiling, Harlow blinked. The figure was gone. Only ripples remained. Behind him, the memorial seemed heavier. He counted again. 45. But as he turned to leave, another name faded. Slowly, deliberately, like breath on glass. 44. The lake keeps what it loves. The dead don't rot. They wait. And beneath the shrinking water line, there were still 44 left, waiting their turn to rise. Chapter 6. If it whispers you, it's already chosen. The first night without sleep felt accidental. The second felt coincidental. By the third, it felt deliberate. Alina had not slept more than 20 minutes at a time since her name had been spoken in the church. Every time she drifted toward unconsciousness, the same image surfaced. She was standing at the bottom of the lake. Not drowning. Not struggling. Simply standing. The water rose above her head, yet she breathed easily. Light filtered down from a distant surface, fractured and dim. Around her, the preserved houses of Briar Hollow stood upright and intact, windows glowing faintly from within. And in the distance, a bell tolled. Underwater. She would try to move, to swim upward. But her feet were rooted, embedded in silt, as if something beneath the lakebed held her ankles gently in place. Not restraining, not hurting, just waiting. Each time the dream reached the moment where shadows began stepping from the doorways of submerged houses, she woke. She'd soaked, hair damp against her temples, the smell of mineral water thick in the room. She told herself it was anxiety, collective hysteria, the power of suggestion, until she noticed the footprints. They began near her bedroom door. Small, wet, leading toward her bed. Not from it, toward it. She stared at them in the gray light of morning. Each print was perfectly defined, toes and arch visible in fine detail. The water inside them shimmered faintly. They stopped at the edge of her mattress, as if someone had stood there, watching her sleep. Her heart slowed for a moment, an odd calm spreading through her chest. Then the whisper returned. Alina. She closed her eyes. If you hear it once, it's the wind, she whispered automatically. Silence. Her heart steadied. Then, Alina. Closer. From beneath the bed. Her heart began racing again. She stepped backward slowly, never taking her eyes off the dark space beneath the frame. Nothing moved. No shape shifted. The footprints evaporated slowly as she watched, absorbed into dry carpet without stain. The lake doesn't chase you. It waits for you to come back. Across town, Dane hadn't streamed in 2 days. His followers filled his inbox with concern and conspiracy. He sat in his living room staring at a blank television screen, remote dangling loosely in his hand. He hadn't slept either. Every time he closed his eyes, he was in the same place, standing underwater. In the church, the pews were filled, but not with living people. With the returned, Thomas Grady in the front row, Margaret Klein beside him, all of them smiling. The bell rope drifted lazily in submerged current above the altar. In the dream, Dane tried to speak. Bubbles left his mouth instead. The congregation stood in unison and began walking toward him. He woke each time at the moment their hands touched his shoulders. Now exhaustion hollowed his face. He rose slowly and walked toward the bathroom. The mirror above the sink reflected someone who looked slightly swollen. His skin seemed tighter than usual. His eyes glassier. He turned on the faucet. Clear water flowed. Normal. He splashed his face. The water felt colder than it should have. He shut it off. Drip. 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 The sink continued running. A thin stream slipped from the faucet, even though the handle was fully turned. The water pooled briefly, then stopped. He leaned closer. The surface of the sink water rippled. A whisper rose from it. Dane. His knees nearly buckled. The lake doesn't chase you. It waits for you to come back. Carl Whitaker lasted 4 nights before calling the sheriff. I'm not crazy, he said over the phone, voice trembling. You know me. Harlow did know him. Carl was steady, routine-bound, predictable. Now his words rushed out in uneven bursts. It's inside the house, Carl said. It's not breaking in, it's just here. Harlow drove out immediately. When he stepped inside Carl's farmhouse, the air felt humid. The floorboards near the hallway gleamed faintly. Wet. Carl stood near the kitchen, pale and shaking. Look, he whispered. Harlow followed his gaze. A trail of damp footprints moved from the back door toward the living room. They were not Carl's. They were larger, broader. Water pooled in each one. The prince stopped at Carl's recliner. Harlow felt his pulse quicken. When did this start? He asked. After it said my name. Of course. Harlow knelt to examine one print. It was fresh. The water inside it trembled slightly. He leaned closer. His own reflection shimmered in its surface. And for a brief second, he saw another face beside his. Smiling, he jerked back. The print evaporated instantly. Dry wood remained. Carl stared at him. You saw it too. Harlow didn't answer, because he had begun hearing it as well. Not clearly, not fully formed, but in the quietest moments. His name lingered just beneath sound. The lake keeps what it loves. The dead don't rot. They wait. And if it whispers you, it has already chosen. By the 6th night, Briar County felt submerged. Not physically, but atmospherically. Fog gathered low to the ground, though forecasts predicted clear skies. Windows collected condensation from the inside. Pipes rattled softly even when unused. Dr. Mercer compiled new reports. Insomnia. Vivid underwater dreams. Unexplained dampness in homes. Each report tied to someone whose name had been whispered. Each person described the same dream, standing at the bottom of the lake. Rooted. Watching something approach. The lake doesn't chase you. It waits for you to come back. Harlow stood once more at the exposed shoreline that evening. The waterline was thinner now, reduced to a shallow, trembling pool at the lake's center. He stared into it. His reflection stared back. For a moment, the reflection smiled. He did not. He stepped backward sharply. The surface stilled. Behind him, the granite memorial stood quiet. He turned. 43 names remained. One more had vanished overnight. Not surfaced. Not yet. Vanished. As if reclaimed. The wind shifted faintly. Across the lake bed, the church doors creaked open on their own. Slowly. Deliberately. Inviting. From somewhere deep beneath the remaining water, a low vibration hummed upward. Not a bell this time. Not yet. Just a pulse. Like a heartbeat. Measured. Steady. Waiting. And in houses across Briar County, sheets grew damp. Footprints formed. Names were whispered again. Because the lake does not chase. It does not drag. It does not force. It simply waits for you to come back on your own. Chapter 7. The second flood was no accident. The truth did not arrive in a revelation. It arrived in paperwork. Sheriff Harlow had spent most of his adult life believing the dam failure was a tragedy born from neglect, heavy rain, structural weakness, a perfect storm of incompetence. That was the official version. But official versions grow thin under pressure. And Briar County was under pressure now. The whispers had spread beyond isolated incidents. 16 residents had reported hearing their names. 9 of them had not slept in days. 3 had been found wandering near the exposed shoreline at dawn, with no memory of leaving their homes. The lake was not simply returning bodies. It was calling the living. Harlow found himself in the county archives one humid afternoon, flipping through brittle documents that smelled faintly of mildew and dust. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. He only knew something about the original flood felt unfinished. The file marked Briar Hollow Dam Failure, 1979, was thicker than expected. He opened it slowly. At first it contained what he remembered: engineering reports, rainfall data, photographs of destroyed farmland, compensation claims. Then halfway through the stack, the tone shifted. A memo from the State Water Authority caught his attention. It was marked confidential. He read it once, then again. Following reports of community-wide behavioral disturbance in Briar Hollow, state officials authorized immediate structural release of the dam reservoir, public explanation to remain consistent with catastrophic rainfall event. Harlow felt the air grow thinner. He continued reading. Documented incidents include synchronized walking into water, auditory hallucinations referencing personal identification, and refusal to evacuate low-ground dwellings despite repeated warnings. He lowered the paper slowly. Synchronized walking into water. Auditory hallucinations referencing personal identification. Names. He flipped to the next page. Witness testimony transcripts. One entry was circled in red ink. "I heard my name," the villager had written. It wasn't frightening, it was gentle, it felt like being called home. Harlow's pulse pounded behind his eyes. Another transcript. "My wife walked past me without speaking. She went down to the lake like she was going to church. I asked her where she was going. She said, 'It's time.'" He closed his eyes briefly. The bell had been ringing that day. According to official records, the dam had failed during the Sunday service. But now he wasn't sure. He continued searching. Near the back of the file, a thin leather-bound journal had been clipped into evidence. Property of Reverend Elias Klein. Margaret Klein's husband. The returned woman from the second body. Harlow opened the journal carefully. The ink had faded but remained legible. Entry March 3, 1979. Some members of the congregation report hearing whispers during prayer. They claim it comes from beneath the floorboards. I dismissed it as nerves. Perhaps I was wrong. Entry March 10th. The bell rings when no one touches it. The rope sways. I cannot explain it. I fear I should have listened sooner. Entry March 14th. 3 parishioners walked into the lake today, calmly, shoes left neatly at the shore. They did not struggle. They did not scream. They smiled. Harlow's breath hitched. Entry March 17th. They say it calls them by name. I do not hear it yet, but I see it in their eyes. The waiting. The waiting. The phrase felt familiar. The lake keeps what it loves. The dead don't rot. They wait. Harlow flipped to the final entry. March 20th. The day of the flood. The state officials came today. They spoke in low voices. They believe the water itself is causing hysteria. They propose release of the dam to bury the town entirely. I told them burial is not the same as cleansing. The ink on the last line grew jagged. If the water is speaking, breaking the dam will not silence it. It will only deepen its voice. The entry ended there. No mention of rain. No mention of structural collapse. Just authorization. A choice. Harlow leaned back in his chair, heart pounding. The flood had not been an accident. It had been containment. They hadn't tried to save Briar Hollow. They had tried to drown it. Hours passed, though outside, the day remained motionless. Harlow drove to the exposed shoreline as dusk approached. The lake had receded even farther. The skeletal outline of Main Street now stretched fully visible across the lake bed, storefront windows staring blankly at the sky. Elena stood near the church doors when he arrived. She looked exhausted. So it wasn't the rain, she said quietly before he could speak. He studied her face. How do you know? I found the archives online. Someone leaked the memo. She gestured toward the lake. They flooded them on purpose. The wind shifted faintly. The church doors creaked open. From within, the bell rope swayed once. Not violently. Deliberately. Elena stepped closer to the threshold. I keep dreaming about standing at the bottom, she said, like I'm already there. Harlow didn't tell her he'd begun dreaming the same thing. Instead, he asked, in your dream, are they moving? She swallowed. Yes. How? Not toward me, she said, past me. A chill moved through him. The lake isn't returning the drowned. It's finishing something interrupted. The realization settled slowly. When the dam was released, Briar Hollow had not fully succumbed to whatever called them. Some had drowned willingly. Some had resisted. Some had been cut off mid-process. The flood hadn't ended it. It had paused it. The preserved bodies rising now were not random. They were incomplete. They were placeholders. The lake was not reclaiming them. It was correcting a delay. Behind them, the remaining water trembled faintly. A ripple expanded outward from the center. Then another. And another. Not chaotic. Not violent. Measured. Like breath. Harlow turned toward the granite memorial at the park entrance. He counted. 42. The number had dropped again. One more name erased. One more soul reclaimed. Elena stepped into the church. The interior was dim, cooler than outside. The bell rope hung still, but the air vibrated faintly. She moved toward the altar. The floorboards beneath her feet felt damp. She looked down. Water seeped upward between the planks. Clear. Cold. The lake doesn't chase you. It waits for you to come back. From beneath the floor, a voice rose. Layered. Not hers. Not Harlow. Many voices at once. We were interrupted. Her heart slowed, oddly calm. "What do you want?" she whispered. The bell above tolled once. "Deep. Submerged. We want to finish." Outside, the lakeline shuddered. The last shallow pool at its center deepened slightly, as if something beneath had shifted weight. Harlow stepped into the church doorway. "Alina," he said sharply. She turned. Her expression was different. Not afraid. Not fully. But softened. As if she were remembering something fond. "They didn't drown by accident," she said quietly. "They answered." The bell tolled again. Longer this time. The second flood was not an accident. It had been an attempt to bury a voice. But voices do not die in water. They deepen. And now, the lake was rising again. Not with rain. Not with storm. But from beneath. Finishing what it had started. As dusk bled into night, the waterline expanded outward by several inches. Just enough to be noticed. Just enough to confirm. The interruption was over. And the lake was ready to continue. Chapter 8. They walked out of the water at dusk. The first body disappeared at 3:12 a.m. No alarms were triggered. No glass shattered. No doors were forced. Thomas Grady simply was no longer on the gurney. The security footage told the story in grainy black and white. At 3:11 a.m., the morgue corridor sat empty beneath fluorescent lights. The camera timestamp flickered faintly, then stabilized. At 3:12, the metal door to cold storage opened inward. No hand appeared on the handle. No figure entered. The door swung slowly on its hinges, as if someone had walked through it. Seconds later, Thomas Grady stepped out. Upright. Balanced. Dripping. His hospital sheet slid from his shoulders and pooled on the tile behind him. His eyes were open. His lips curved into that same quiet smile. He did not stagger. He did not lurch. He walked. Measured. Deliberate. Water trailed from his clothes in thin rivulets, leaving a glossy path across the floor. At 3:14 a.m., Margaret Klein followed. Then Daniel Reeves. Then two more. Each one emerging in sequence, as if waiting their turn. The footage showed them pause briefly in the corridor. All five turned their heads in unison. Toward the camera. Toward the viewer. And smiled wider. The timestamp glitched again. For half a second it read tomorrow. Then it corrected. At 3:17 a.m. they exited the frame. The doors to the morgue opened automatically as they approached. The night swallowed them. Hours passed, though outside, the sky remained indifferent. By dawn, the lake had risen another inch. Not enough to alarm the weather service. Enough to be noticed. Sheriff Harlow stood in the morgue staring at the footage with a face drained of color. "They walked," the deputy whispered beside him. "Yes," Harlow said quietly. "They walked." The water on the tile floor had not dried. It remained pooled in small reflective patches. When Harlow crouched and touched one with gloved fingers, it felt colder than the air around it. Mineral heavy. Clean. The dead don't rot. They wait. And when they rise, they don't shamble. They return. By late afternoon, the first sighting came from the eastern shoreline. A retired teacher named Marlene Owens had been watching the sunset from her porch when she noticed movement near the waterline. At first she thought it was tourists. But the lake park had closed that morning. The figures walked single file along the edge of the water. Not hurried. Not erratic. Steady. Purposeful. The setting sun cast them in amber light. Their clothes clung wetly to their frames. Their arms hung relaxed at their sides. Marlene leaned forward in her chair. There were 5 of them. She recognized the posture of Thomas Grady. He had once delivered mail in Briar Hollow. He used to tip his hat. Now he walked past her porch without looking up, without acknowledging her. Water dripped from his sleeves onto the dry earth. The ground did not absorb it. It pooled briefly, then sank straight downward, as if welcomed. Marlene stood slowly. "Thomas," she called, voice trembling. The line of figures stopped. All 5 turned toward her simultaneously. Even from a distance, she could see the smiles. Not wide, not exaggerated, just fixed, serene. Thomas lifted one hand, not to wave, but to point at her. Her breath caught in her throat. "The lake doesn't chase you. It waits for you to come back." Behind her house, the kitchen faucet began to drip. Across town, Elena stood at her apartment window watching the shoreline through binoculars. She had heard the reports. She had seen the footage. But seeing them with her own eyes fractured something deeper. They walked as if gravity still applied to them, as if breath still moved through lungs, as if the flood had never happened. Beside her, Dane filmed silently. No commentary, no whispering narration, just the soft hum of his camera recording. "They're not attacking anyone," he said finally, voice hollow. "No," Elena replied. "They're going home." The figures reached the exposed outline of Main Street. Without hesitation, they turned and began walking across the lakebed toward the church. Their feet left wet impressions behind them. But the mud did not swallow them. It parted, yielding gently. The bell tolled once. Deep, submerged. The returned entered the church one by one. The doors closed behind them. The shoreline went still. Some drownings walk ashore. The phrase no longer felt metaphorical. It felt literal. By nightfall, more sightings came in. 2 figures near the dam. 3 near the old cemetery. 1 standing ankle-deep in the shallow water at the lake's center, staring toward town. They were not gathering randomly. They were moving in arcs. Paths converging. Sheriff Harlow drove along the perimeter road at dusk, headlights cutting through thickening fog. He saw them clearly when his beams crossed the lakebed. 7 figures now, walking in slow procession toward the church. He pulled the cruiser to a stop. Stepped out. His boots crunched against gravel. "Stop," he shouted. The figures paused. One by one, they turned their heads toward him. The smiles widened slightly. But they did not advance. They did not retreat. They resumed walking. Past him, as if he were nothing more than a tree at the roadside. The bell tolled again. Longer. He felt the vibration in his sternum. Behind him, his radio crackled faintly. Not with dispatch chatter. With static. Underneath the static, a whisper. "Daniel." He froze. No one called him that anymore. Only his mother had used his full name. "Daniel." The voice layered softly through the radio speaker. "The lake keeps what it loves." He shut the radio off sharply. The static ceased, but the echo lingered in his skull. As darkness settled fully over Briar County, the lake rose another inch. Then another. Slow. Measured. The exposed mud grew thinner. The street outlines blurred. Water reclaimed the spaces between ruins. From inside the church, a faint glow flickered behind stained glass. Not fire. Not electricity. Something softer. Something refracted. Inside, the return stood in the pews once more. Upright, smiling, facing the altar. The bell rope swayed gently overhead. And beneath the water, more figures began to rise. Not surfacing yet, just ascending, waiting for dusk. Some drownings walk ashore. And tomorrow, more would follow. Chapter 9. The lake needed witnesses. The rain began without clouds. At least that's how it felt. The sky over Briar County had been clear at sunset, thin streaks of fatting orange bleeding into violet, the exposed lakebed reflecting what little light remained. The returned had already gathered inside the church again, their silhouettes faint behind fractured stained glass. By midnight the air changed. Heavy, pressurized, the kind of stillness that makes ears pop. Then, a single drop struck Sheriff Harlow's windshield. He looked up. The sky was still empty. Another drop. Then another. Within seconds the sound intensified, rain hammering asphalt, rooftops, exposed mud. Torrential, sudden, as if someone had torn open a reservoir above the town. The weather forecast had predicted nothing. No front, no systems, no atmospheric disturbance. But Briar County drowned again. Inside their homes, families woke to the violent drumming on windows. Children cried. Dogs barked. The air smelled sharp and metallic, like the moments before a lightning strike. Elena stood at her window, watching water pour from nowhere. The streetlights blurred. The gutters overflowed within minutes. Across town, Dane filmed through his glass balcony door. "This isn't normal," he whispered into the camera, though he had no intention of posting it yet. Lightning flashed once, illuminating the lake in stark white relief. The waterline had expanded dramatically. The exposed street of Briar Hollow vanished beneath rising waves. The church stood half submerged again. The bell tolled once. Deep. Submerged. The whispers came with the rain. Not faint. Not isolated. Loud. Layered. Whole households heard them at once. In the Owens home, Marlene and her daughter froze mid-step as the sound filled their kitchen. Marlene. Clara. The names overlapped. Spoken together. From the pipes. From the walls. From the ceiling itself. They stared at one another. Neither had spoken. Across town. Daniel. Ruth. Sheriff Harlow and his wife stood in the hallway as their names threaded through the house in unison. The lake doesn't chase you. It waits for you to come back. The difference now was undeniable. It wasn't whispering to individuals anymore. It was addressing families. Entire bloodlines. The rain intensified. Within hours, the lake had reclaimed most of its former boundary. Only the steeple of the church remained visible. And the bell continued ringing. Not in sets of 3 now. Just once. Then silence. Then once again. As if counting. Hours passed, though outside the storm never weakened. Dr. Mercer drove toward the shoreline despite flooded roads. She had stopped sleeping entirely. The dreams had grown more vivid, more detailed. Now when she stood at the bottom of the lake in her sleep, she no longer felt rooted. She felt guided. Figures stood around her in a circle, hands gently resting at her shoulders, back, wrists. Not restraining. Welcoming. When she arrived at the lake park, she found Sheriff Harlow already there, rain soaking through his uniform. They watched the water swallow the memorial stone slowly. One engraved name at a time disappeared beneath rising tide. Harlow's voice was barely audible over the storm. "It wasn't hysteria," he said. Mercer nodded. It was recruitment. They stood in silence. The bell tolled again. And in that moment, something shifted in understanding. The exposure of Briar Hollow had not been an accident of drought. The drought had been part of the pattern. The lake had receded not to punish, not to threaten, but to reveal, to remind, to let the town see what it had tried to bury. The preserved bodies rising, the erased names, the synchronized walking, the interrupted flood. It had needed witnesses, because memory strengthens return. The lake keeps what it loves, but love requires recognition. The first flood had buried the voice. The drought had uncovered it. Now the rain was finishing the circle. The lake needed the town to remember before reclaiming them. Lightning struck near the water's edge. In the flash, Harlow saw them clearly. Dozens of figures standing ankle-deep in rising water. Not only the returned, but the living. Marlene Owens walked calmly toward the lake. Clara beside her. Carl Whitaker a few steps behind them. Elena stood farther down the shoreline, shoes abandoned neatly behind her. They were not struggling. They were not frantic. Their movements were slow, measured, peaceful, as if attending service. Harlow's chest tightened. "Stop," he shouted into the storm. None of them turned. The whispers had grown louder than the rain now. Layered, unified, calling entire households at once. Inside the church steeple, barely visible above water, the bell rope swung violently. The tolling quickened. Dr. Mercer grabbed Harlow's arm. "Look," she said. The water was no longer rising solely from rainfall. It surged upward from beneath, from the lake bed itself, as if something vast shifted below the surface. The town had tried to drown it once, but drowning is not erasure. It is transformation. The living stepped deeper, waist high now, shoulder high. Their faces softened, smiles forming, the same serene curve as the returned. Elena paused for a moment. Her eyes found Harlow across the distance. There was no fear in them, only recognition, understanding. The lake doesn't chase you. It waits for you to come back. The bell tolled one final time. Long, resonant. The steeple disappeared beneath the surface, and the rain stopped instantly. Silence fell. The lake now full, calm, glass smooth. The figures who had stepped into it were gone. No thrashing, no screams, just absence. Harlow stood motionless in the sudden stillness. Beside him, Dr. Mercer exhaled slowly. The memorial stone lay completely submerged. 42 names. Then 41. Then 40. One by one, the engraved letters dissolved beneath the water's reflection. The lake had not needed to destroy Briar County. It had needed them to witness what was unfinished, to understand that the flood was not catastrophe. It was continuation. And now, the interruption was over. The surface of the lake rippled faintly once. Not from wind, not from rain, from beneath, as if something enormous had settled back into place. Waiting again. But this time, satisfied, because those who had heard their names had answered, and the lake no longer needed to whisper. Tomorrow, more would be missing, and no one would remember they had ever been here at all. Chapter 10. When it says your name, go quietly. Dawn came without birds. The rain had stopped hours earlier, but Briar County did not wake the way it used to. There was no hum of early traffic, no lawn sprinklers clicking on, no distant barking. Only the lake. Full again. Still. Perfectly reflective beneath a pale gray sky. The church steeple was gone. The exposed streets of Briar Hollow had vanished. The memorial stone lay somewhere beneath the surface, its engraved name swallowed into dark water. Sheriff Harlow stood at the shoreline with hollow eyes and damp cuffs. He had not left. He had not slept. Beside him, Dr. Mercer clutched her coat tighter around her shoulders, though the air was not cold. They were not alone. Across the park entrance and along the road, people gathered. Not in panic. Not in protest. In silence. Dozens of them. Men, women, teenagers, a mother holding her son's hand. They walked from their homes slowly, calmly, as if responding to a curfew no one else could hear. Harlow stepped forward. "Go back," he said hoarsely. No one answered. They continued moving. Measured. Peaceful. A few of them removed their shoes and set them neatly on the grass. Alina's shoes were still there from the night before. Dane's camera lay abandoned near the dock, lens cracked but still pointed toward the water. The lake doesn't chase you. It waits for you to come back. The whispers were no longer layered chaos. Now they were singular. Personal. Each person heard only their own name. Soft. Intimate. Like a lover's voice in the dark. Dr. Mercer closed her eyes. She heard it clearly now. Elaine. Her breath steadied. She did not move. Not yet. Harlow grabbed her wrist gently. "Don't," he said. She opened her eyes. "There's no violence in it," she whispered. "Not unless you fight." He didn't understand. Not fully. Until the first scream broke the morning. It came from a man near the center of the gathering. He had been walking calmly like the others. But at the edge of the water he stopped. He shook his head violently. "No," he muttered. "No, no, no." He stepped backward. The lake responded. The surface trembled. Then, his feet slid forward. Not from force. From suction. The water surged toward him unnaturally fast, wrapping around his ankles like hands. He clawed at the grass. The suction intensified. His scream sharpened. He was dragged forward violently, body slamming into the rising surface as if pulled by something immense beneath. The water swallowed him in seconds. The ripples faded almost instantly. Silence returned. Harlow's heart pounded. Dr. Mercer's face drained of color. The next woman approached the shoreline. She did not hesitate. She did not resist. When her name was spoken, she exhaled softly and stepped forward. The water rose gently to meet her. No dragging. No force. It enveloped her slowly, like fabric settling over shoulders. She disappeared beneath the surface without a splash. The lake remained smooth. When it says your name, go quietly. The pattern became clear. Resistance caused suffering. Acceptance brought stillness. One by one, the townspeople stepped into the lake. Some paused at the edge, tears streaming silently. Some smiled faintly. Some whispered apologies to loved ones standing behind them. But none screamed. Not after the first. Harlow felt it then. Clear. Undeniable. Daniel. The voice was not external. It was inside his chest, vibrating against bone. His breath slowed involuntarily. The lake keeps what it loves. And now, it loves again. He turned toward Dr. Mercer. She shook her head slightly. "You don't have to," she said. But her voice wavered, because she heard her own name again. Soft. Persistent. He stepped closer to the waterline. The surface reflected him clearly. For a moment, his reflection smiled. He did not. Daniel. The lake's voice carried no malice, no threat, only inevitability. Behind him, only a handful of people remained. The rest had gone. The grass where they had stood was wet but undisturbed. No footprints, no drag marks, as if they had never been there at all. Dr. Mercer squeezed his hand. "If you fight it." "I know," he said quietly. He stepped into the water. It was not cold, not warm, just present. It rose to his ankles gently. No pulling, no resistance. His heartbeat slowed. The whisper softened. "You were always ours." He turned once more toward shore. Dr. Mercer stood alone now. Her name echoed faintly through the air. Elaine. She inhaled sharply. For a moment, she considered stepping back. Running. Leaving town. But she had read the journal. She had seen the footage. She understood. The first flood had been interruption. This was completion. She stepped forward. The lake met her calmly. Together, they waded deeper. Waist high. Chest high. Shoulder high. Harlow's hand slipped from hers as they drifted apart. Not pulled. Simply guided. The water closed over his head. There was no burning in his lungs. No panic. Only silence. Below the surface, Briar Hollow stood restored. Houses intact. Windows glowing softly. The church bell tower whole again. Inside the nave, the returned waited. Not hostile. Not grotesque. Smiling. Harlow's feet touched the submerged street. He stood upright, breathing, as if this were where he had always belonged. Above, the surface smoothed completely. The last ripple faded. On shore, no one remained. No cars in the parking lot. No shoes on the grass. No memorial stone at the entrance. It was as if Briar County had always been smaller. Quieter. The sky brightened slightly. Sunlight struck the lake in calm reflection. A single bell tolled beneath the water. Deep. Submerged. Satisfied. Because the lake keeps what it loves. It had kept them once. It had waited decades. It had uncovered memory. It had invited witness. And now, it had welcomed them home. Far beneath the surface, in the restored streets of Briar Hollow, two new figures took their places among the congregation. Smiling, waiting, because droughts end, floods return, and someday, the lake will recede again. And when it does, some drownings will walk ashore, and new names will be spoken. Softly, gently, until they answer. When it says your name, go quietly.
Closing chapter.
The lake did not kill them, it called them. It waited decades beneath still water, beneath drought and denial, beneath the lie that time erases what we bury, but nothing was erased. The dead did not decay. The whispers did not fade. The village did not disappear. It was paused, and when the water left, the truth rose with it. Some drownings walk ashore. Some names cannot be unheard, and some places do not forget the people who belong to them. So if you ever stand at the edge of quiet water and you hear something beneath the silence, don't answer. Don't lean closer. Don't convince yourself it's the wind. Because the lake doesn't need to drag you under. It only needs you to listen. And if it ever says your name, go quietly.